From what you've heard, from what you've seen, what has been written by Theresa May, what's been said by Jean-Claude Juncker, are you prepared now to vote for the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement?
Well, as I says, it all hinges on what Geoffrey Cox says in his legal advice. It was fundamental before that he said, we could be trapped in a Hotel California, can't get out arrangement with the European Union, which is of itself worse than what we are now. We could walk away today if we chose to. So that's the central point of this. And most central to it is, if we don't think the European Union's doing what it said it was going to do, which was to conclude the alternative arrangements in a suitable time, then we've asserted we can make our own decision. And I think that's important both in legal terms and political terms. It'll be interesting to see what Mr. Cox says there. If Geoffrey Cox says that this has legal force, the requirement to work on the alternative arrangements, the date of the end of 2020, that's key. That wasn't mentioned earlier. To conclude this by the end of 2020, and our right to walk away, and independent arbitration, by the way, not arbitration by the European Court of Justice, which none of us view as independent. All those things together make this just about acceptable to me. But it depends very, very heavily on robust, clear response from Cox. If Geoffrey Cox is at all equivocal about it, then I think it will fall again.
So the message that's going to be going to the government today from Eurosceptic MPs like yourself in the Jerry Maguire sense will be, you had me at legally binding joint interpretive instrument. I mean, realistically, the 585-page withdrawal agreement is unchanged, not so much as a full stop or a dot on an I has been changed. The Brady Amendment, let me finish, David. The Brady Amendment, which voted, it was a clear majority in the House of Commons, voted for the backstop to be replaced. That was the word, replaced. The backstop is not replaced. It is still in there in the withdrawal agreement. This is not what MPs voted for.
Two things. I mean, firstly, so all this codicil nonsense and joint interpretive instrument, what matters is whether it has legal force. I was never one who said it's got to be this or that thing. It's got to be inside the text or whatever. The point is whether or not it has legal force. That's what matters, nothing else. So secondly, in terms of the alternative arrangement, what they've set in the text is a date of the end of 2020, which actually is a good date from my point of view because it's the end of the implementation period too. So we really leave, as it were, the 1st of January 2021. Now, what is said is that the two sides will attempt to get in place the alternative arrangements by then. So there won't be a backstop. The backstop won't come into force because you'll have the alternative arrangements. Now, we'll know quite soon, actually, whether they're being serious about this. One of the things that happened in the last 2 years was the attitude of the Irish government and the Irish customs authorities changed. Just before Mr. Varadkar came in, they went from being very cooperative with the British customs authorities to actually not dealing with them at all over how we solve the technical problems of the Irish border. And from that point forward, we've made no progress with them. Now, if they still take that stance after this, then we'll know they're not being serious and we'll start to prepare accordingly. But I think that they will come back to the table and now try to find a solution for Northern Ireland. We know there's a solution for Northern Ireland in terms of technical administrative measures. The Irish government's got to come and cooperate with us on this, and then we'll make progress.
Jean-Claude Juncker, the European Commission President, tweeted, "The choice is clear. It's this deal or Brexit may not happen at all," which many Eurosceptics are seeing as something of a threat. Is there not a risk that Eurosceptic MPs like yourself, people who campaigned for Brexit, who promised to deliver Brexit, have basically given in to the bully boy tactics of Ramonas? They're threatening to extend Article 50. They're threatening to vote against, to take no deal off the table, which is utterly meaningless other than to totally undermine Britain's negotiating position. But aren't you in danger of just giving in to that bully boy tactic in the face of the overwhelming support from Leave voters for us to carry on?
Mr. Juncker. Oh, yeah, no, look, I mean, let's understand something. I'm funny, I'm sitting here with the speech I wrote yesterday afternoon, which is entitled "Why We'll Vote Against This Deal." That was before we saw it, but because I wasn't expecting to come back with anything, to be honest. But I mean, Juncker and indeed many of the players in Brussels, you're right. They tried bully boy tactics. You just have to ignore them. Frankly, you have just pay no attention to it, one way or the other, because that doesn't matter. Frankly, if they'd come back with nothing today, I was going to argue strongly for a no deal, and I was going to point out the point you made, which is actually the law is written in such a way that we have to leave. Unless you rewrite the law, motions of the House of Commons don't count in this context. Unless you rewrite the law, eventually the law takes effect and you leave. And if you haven't got a deal, you leave with no deal. And frankly, I don't think that's at all terrifying. I think it's perfectly manageable, and most of the British public are heading in that direction too. So, but that's where we are. We are in a position where they appear to be willing to actually meet us in the middle and sort out this issue of Northern Ireland before we get to the point of the backstop. The thing that was so terrible before was the backstop was unending. They would have the power to keep us in the so-called backstop forever. And that did three things. It introduced a terrible breach in the Constitution of the United Kingdom between the Britain, as it were, Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Secondly, it took away any ability of ours to do trade negotiations. And thirdly, it gave them all the negotiating leverage. This has changed all those three things. So long as Geoffrey Cox says this has got legal force, then all of those three things have gone.
Realistically, though, let's say this deal goes through. Let's say we don't have a vote to delay. Although I've got to say, this deal goes through. I don't think for a moment that the Remainers trying for a second referendum will stop their work. I think they'll continue just as they have done.
Yeah,
but on the 30th of March, things will feel exactly the same as on the 29th of March. And the reality is, this is going to carry on. Do you not fear that an awful lot of Brexiteers are going to feel that actually they have had their vote completely ignored? Because we're told, well, this is the start of the transition. This is the start of the Brexit negotiations. We haven't actually negotiated an actual Brexit. This is just a deal for us to remain in on sort of weird, sort of half in, half out terms. This is not going to satisfy Leave voters. It's not going to satisfy Remain voters. It's not going to satisfy anyone.
Well, let's go through those pieces one by one. Look, you're playing my tune in one respect. As you well know, one of the reasons I resigned was because they did the sequencing the wrong way around. They didn't start the negotiations properly in the beginning, and I was overruled on that. But we are where we are. The simple truth is, on the 30th of March, we will have legally left the Union. We'll still have this implementation period for 21 months. That's what business wanted. Fine. That's no big deal. That will give them time to prepare. There won't be any arguments next time around at the end of 2020 that we're not ready for no deal, because they've got no excuse by then. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, on this timetable, by December 2020, we will have an arrangement in place in Northern Ireland. Again, no excuse. If we haven't got that, all the Remainers in government who got in the way of this, who held it up, the Treasury, who've slowed everything down, they won't have any excuse. And so I think if we get to the end of 2020 and we haven't got Northern Ireland resolved, we haven't got the customs arrangements resolved between ourselves and the rest of the European Union, then no deal will be what happens. It will just be us exiting. By then, of course, we'll have negotiated some free trade deals with the rest of the world, which will mitigate some of the any downsides in the European Union transition. But in my view, Julia, this is by no means what I would have liked. By no means what I would have liked. But it will deliver Brexit. Brexit, as you quite rightly were intimating, was being put at risk by die-hard Remainers desperately trying to have this over again, probably led from the back by Tony Blair. And this sees that off, gets round that, and it gets us onto the next step of leaving the European Union. And that, after all, is what people voted for a few years ago.
Would we not, as Brexiteers, be able to see off that threat? I'm not. I mean, I don't think there should be a second referendum, but I'm not afraid of a second referendum. I think Leave would win again and would win bigger.
I think that's probably right. But two things would happen. I mean, firstly, in order to get the second referendum, the first tactic is to delay everything. So we'd be stuck in limbo, as you term it, for another year or so while they organise a referendum. I think the public would really get cross with that. I would get pretty cross with that. And then, of course, we'd have a second referendum. And I think you're right. I think we'd win it. But nevertheless, I mean, it's an insult to the people who voted to leave in the first referendum to say, well, we don't think you got it right. Why don't we try again? That's an attitude that, frankly, in my view, despises democracy. It treats democracy with contempt. And I think the British public will see that. And not just, by the way, not just Leavers. I meet Remainers when I'm travelling on public transport or travelling around my constituency, travelling in the north of England. I meet Remainers who say, this has gone on long enough. Let's get on with it. Let's do it. We don't want a second referendum. We've already made our decision. Let's do it. It wasn't necessarily my decision, but we've done it. So let's get on with it. That, I think, is a message the government should take on board very seriously.
Let me put a tweet to you from Chrissy. I've been asking people whether they would vote for this deal if they were MPs. She says, no, this so-called deal is a sellout. With or without the backstop, it is a Remainers deal to keep the UK permanently under unelected Brussels bureaucrat control. Any MP signing up to this is selling out our country. Are you selling out our country, David?
No. And as I say, it's contingent on what Geoffrey Fox says is the legal force of this. If it hasn't got legal force, then I'm back to my original speech, why I voted against the deal. But it's got to have legal force. It's got legal force, allows us to leave. Look, the really fundamental thing that was wrong with the backstop, the absolutely overarching thing, there were loads of things wrong with the treaty, but the big fundamental thing wrong with it is that it didn't allow us to leave. Like no other treaty in the world, a sovereign state can't leave. Well, this has put that back in the proper range of us being able to leave. That's what the Prime Minister asserted yesterday. Juncker, sitting alongside her, didn't disagree with that.
This is the thing I find extraordinary. We are a powerhouse economy. We are a proud trading nation. And our Prime Minister is willing to sit next to someone saying, there'll be no third chance. The choice is clear. And sit there and basically not agree with her, but just not disagree. And we're willing to put up with that when deciding the future of our nation.
I agree. I agree with that. I think the behaviour of the European Commission in this has been it's been disgraceful, but it's always disgraceful in negotiations. That's its normal stance, and I agree with you that it's not very impressive that we tolerate that. But the simple truth is that this gets us back to a position which is one of normality. Nothing particularly spectacular. It's just one of normality, and so long as Cox tells us it's legally enforceable, then we can deal with it and we can deliver a proper Brexit. There's still a lot of fighting to go, Julia. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a hell of a lot of fighting to go, but this gets us to the next stage. Otherwise, I tell you what we'll have. We will have this proposal will be defeated. We'll then have a proposal tomorrow. The Parliament will try and overrule no deal. It's actually, as you say, meaningless, but nevertheless, it will then open up a delay, all of which we'll resist. But we'll lose those battles. And eventually we'll end up with a second referendum. And you're right, we'll win that. But by then, I think the attitude of the British public to the political establishment will have really gone off a cliff. That will be our, as I said on the television at the weekend, that will be our Trump moment. So this is a way to deliver a proper Brexit. Okay. It's not perfect. It's a lot worse than I would have hoped for, but it's better than one point here. It's significantly better than what was presented a few months ago in November, and then was defeated. And that tells you something as well, which the government has always been unwilling to face. And that is, if you go back and force the point with the European Union, they find a way of making the concession. They'll do it grudgingly, they'll hide it, they'll refuse to admit it, but they made the concession. And there are three major concessions in this. It's different, and they've delivered on it because we forced it. And how did we force it? By defeating it by 230 votes. Next time around, if they try this again, we'll get defeated by 230 votes again.